tell Jack about the dowry.
Welcome to the Progress Texas Happy Hour.
I've been thinking about this. If you don't have a wedding, we can just get married.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Progress Texas Happy Hour. Communications Director Chris Mosier here. The Texas Rio Grande Valley is central to several hard truths this midterm election year. Voters in the RGV swung hard for Donald Trump in 2024, but since have seen a possibly equal backlash over the Trump administration's abuse of Latino Americans nationwide via aggressive ICE crackdowns and the failure of the administration to deliver on promised economic goals. The cost of living has not come down since last year, as we all know. Another hard fact regarding South Texas is the frustrating tendency of its elected congressional Democrats to vote against the stated values of the party that's elevated them to office. Perhaps the most glaring recent example, votes by both Congressman Henry Cuellar and Vicente Gonzales to support funding for the Department of Homeland Security, voting against the vast majority of the Democratic delegation in favor of a bill that includes another $10 billion for ICE. Joining us today is a Texan who's looking to make a change in one of those seats, and we're sure will offer great insight into the RGV, which deserves the attention it's getting this midterm year. Dr. Etienne Rosas is the primary challenger to Congressman Vicente Gonzales in the March primary, which, of course, is coming up in just a few weeks. Dr. Rosas, welcome to the pod.
Thank you, Chris. A pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. Let me say up front that this might be a product of my own ungraceful aging, but you sure seem young for a guy who's properly addressed as Dr. Rosas. So tell us as we start about your background and your education as we get going here.
Yeah, sure. So I have a PhD in public policy analysis that I earned from Rand Graduate School of Public Policy. And that has basically been a lot of my formation in terms of the nuts and bolts of policy. Before that, I did a master's in diplomacy and international relations and strategic negotiation. Originally, my bachelor's was in finance, and that was around the time of the financial meltdown. So it was a very bad time to be in finance. But I quickly realized that finance was just actually not for me. And it was one of those things that as I was growing up, I had no real idea of what I wanted to do for a college degree, and I was like, okay, let's go that route and see what happens. So then I ended up in public policy just after, sort of like just navigating my career towards the things that interested me the most. And one of the things that interested me the most was the state. So I travel back and forth in the Valley, like a lot of people in the Valley. I travel back and forth between Mexico and the United States. I have a lot of family in Monterrey, a lot of friends in Monterrey. And one thing I've always noticed and actually had to shape my life around is the constant paradigm of the drug war. So seeing how this affected my life, that's how I started getting deeper and deeper, ended up with a PhD in public policy, which was geared towards solving a lot of these problems. And that's my background has been in security studies and the sort of intersection points between organized crime and extremism. And then also after that, ended up doing some lecturing and researching in Princeton University most recently. So now I'm back here in the Valley, although the Valley Brownsville has always been my hometown. And it's, the place where I coalesce with my family. And, this is where I live.
So here at Progress Texas, we don't too commonly feature primary challengers for Democratic incumbents. But as I said, these two South Texas electeds in particular present an unusual case, as we've talked about briefly. Give us your case on why Vicente Gonzales should be replaced in Washington, D.C., representing the voters of Harlingen and Brownsville and San Benito and Kingsville and several other places there in the district.
Well, I mean, as I mentioned, my background has been in public policy and in crafting policy that I expect to help my community and for it to be delivered by politicians. If Vicente had been doing his job, I wouldn't be doing this at all. I was always hoping for him to get a challenger. He's gone on 4 years representing us without facing any kind of scrutiny or challenge. And at this point in time, when we see the country being torn apart by forces of fascism, and especially my community just being sidelined and cornered by a lot of these huge corporate actors like, Elon Musk with SpaceX and all these other kinds of abuses now with ICE, I just I was waiting to see that voice of stern and very courageous leadership to move the needle in some direction that helped our community, and it was nowhere to be found. And I was waiting for somebody to rise up that I could get behind, at least to scrutinize what Vicente Gonzalez has been doing, because if anything, he has a talent for keeping his head down, voting one way, and then coming to our community and saying he's doing something else. So instead of waiting and being complacent, I decided at this point in time it was just too important, and the moment was just too urgent to stay on the sidelines. So I decided to run against him, at the very least to get him to answer for these kinds of votes, which I was sure were going to continue to happen.
Well, and again, the major current example is this DHS funding vote that both Gonzalez and Cuellar voted in favor. They were among only 7 Democrats in the entire House that broke with their party to support that bill. Since that happened, of course, the shooting of Alex Preti in Minneapolis has happened. There's been a major PR backlash against ICE in general, which of course is doubled by the death of Renee Good just a couple of weeks ago in similar fashion. Talk about that vote in particular, Dr. Rosas, in terms of is that something that the congressman is doing that, in your opinion, is in line with the wants and needs of his district and his constituents?
No, absolutely not. I think as many excuses as he's tried to give, the reality on the ground, and you've seen it now being rejected by the Senate because they saw the repercussions of them breaking the party lines on this very critical, also just a very just visceral, emotional issue for most Americans as they're seeing their cities be terrorized.
Yep.
This was absolutely a moment when they had to stand up firmly in support of people across the country and say, we're not going to pass any bill that includes any more funding for this paramilitary group that Trump has deployed across the country. And all of the Democrats understood that assignment. All of the Democrats knew how urgent this was and heard the clamor of their community and stood together to stop it from happening. That was really the only leverage and tool that Democrats have in this era of government that we have, where Republicans basically control everything and Trump controls the Republicans. So Vicente Gonzalez, in usual Gonzalez fashion, has tried to steer away from that vote by saying, oh, it contained other provisions and whatnot. But one, I think like he's only saying this because he didn't expect this kind of backlash, which also shows how little he listens to his community and its needs and what they've wanted for the longest time. But 2, it probably means he's also just not really paying attention to what he's voting for and the implications of what that is. And both of them at this point in time are equally bad. Both the fact that he's not listening, and 2, the fact that he's not internalizing how important these kinds of votes are to protect his own population, which, by the way, stands to be one of the most greatly affected by ICE invasions and is already feeling those repercussions.
That's a place we want to go for greater statewide understanding of the dynamics, the cultural and electoral dynamics that exist down in South Texas. Focus on that area, of course, from that standpoint has increased, and duly so. There's a curiosity about why these 2 congressmen in particular have this, pretty well-established tendency to leave the Democratic Party behind on a variety of social justice issues. And then, of course, as we're talking about, on immigration as well, which is, a little bit more kind of a procedural and policy, security sort of issue. Mm-hmm. In your opinion, and coming at this clinically and objectively, as I know you will, as a born and raised South Texas resident yourself, is there any justification based on the wants and needs of the RGB community in particular that would reasonably lead these 2 congressmen to cast the type of votes that we're talking about that seem to be, in contradiction to their party's goals?
No, I don't think there is. I think it's just a lack of political integrity and a lack of political courage, if anything. For the longest time, we've seen the tendency for both of these congressmen to excuse votes that favor big corporations, also that are very big part of their donor base, to feed into the military adventurism abroad. For example, just recently too, another one where they stepped out of the party line was with strikes on Venezuelan boats. Him and Henry Cuellar, where they were the 2 only Democrats that voted with Republicans to prevent the bill that Democrats were advancing to prevent Trump from keeping the bombing going of these Venezuelan boats. And also, Vicente, I don't think was present for that vote, equally egregious, but where there was a resolution that was intended to be passed for Congress to keep its powers per the War Power Resolutions Act and to prevent Trump from having boots on the ground in Venezuela if he so desired, right? So both of them also decided we're okay with that. We're okay with that military ventures, and we're okay with Trump being able to deploy troops abroad and do, his bidding for oil companies. And this is, I think, speaks to the heart of where their bread is buttered. And you see Vicente and Henry Cuellar, they excuse votes that go in favor of Republicans through cultural explanations that have no basis in reality. They say things like, oh, well, Texas is much more conservative. People in Texas actually lean towards the right in certain things. So we actually have to find this mythical middle ground or balance. And that mythical middle ground or balance basically means excusing fascism from time to time and then going over here and doing a couple of photo ops and, pandering to certain groups that then afterwards they can say like, oh, I'm also kind of a Democrat. But in reality, they have a hierarchy within this region. The Democratic Party has developed some kind of a little group of interest within this region that acts very much like Republicans, that has a certain pecking order and that does the bidding of industry, and which is why we have a lot of local governments here that are supposed to be Democrats, but they're actually just favoring the needs of industry and neglecting the needs of their community. So I think like all that is happening is they're obfuscating from that reality that they don't represent communities because supposedly those communities line up more with Republicans, but in the policy matters, when it comes down to it, those labels mean very little. And really what they're using it is an excuse to vote as they actually want to, which is as Republicans, people that depend on corporate donors, that depend on these kinds of on the supposed assault all the time from Republicans to say like, okay, yeah, I may be bad, but look at these guys, like they're the monster. And the whole time they're enabling that monster in order to just continue the game going and being the very middle of the road, ineffective politicians that they are, rather than leaders who propose policy that actually helps their people and who help it move forward, who are on the ground constantly saying, this is what we need to do in order to get this passed. So I think it's just that kind of like rhetoric play that they have in order to just excuse bad voting and sort of much more Republican leans. And I think that's why Republicans sort of leave them alone, right? In the sense that they don't really attack them as much. And Henry Cuellar, for example, he just got a pardon because of him being able to do this.
Which goes a little further than just being left alone. That's being done a huge personal favor for sure.
Right, exactly. And I mean, at the end of the day, if you need pardons from a president who is a president like Trump, you obviously know you're not going to do right by your community. You're going to have to do right by him first and foremost. And the same goes for somebody like Gonzalez, who owes so much to AIPAC, to big oil, to insurance companies. At the end of the day, when it comes to the vote, they're going to be voting in favor of their corporate donors. And in my case, really the issue that he has that, in order to fearmonger more, because that's kind of the only thing they have to offer, is that I am a socialist and then if we don't win, like what's going to happen? Like if we don't win, somebody who's a Republican is going to come in and vote the same way I do anyway, but they're a Republican, that kind of thing. There's very little proposition. It's much more this kind of fear mongering mentality.
Interesting. So there has been this narrative that's developed about South Texas that somehow it has its own Overton window, as it were, that there is an underlying cultural conservatism that informs the way these two guys vote. You're saying that's not the case at all, is what I'm hearing.
What I'm saying is more that regardless of what people's cultural affiliations or proclivities, at the end of the day, what they want are programs that work for them and for their families. You get all of these like cultural bones thrown at. It's exactly the same thing that Trump does throughout the nation, by the way. He throws these cultural bones for people to pick fights over and to divide the working class from the real issues that actually would address their necessities.
Sure.
So when you have a population that is frustrated, that can't get its needs met, the easiest thing is to say like, oh, it's the migrants, oh, it's the Mexicans, or it's the Venezuelans, or it's the Iranians, or it's the people like that don't want to work in your community. And rather than do anything about it, they instead say like, well, we can't really do much because people won't vote that way, rather than them being the champions of what actually works. Like policy at the end of the day, and it's one thing, if they had a background in policy, they would realize policy is not a game of average mentalities or average impressions. It's a game of solutions, right? If we want to do things like, if people say they don't have access to healthcare, your job is not to say, well, I mean, I know universal healthcare is the answer here, but what about what insurance companies want? We have to appease them. No, if insurance companies are the problem, then they must be dealt with. And the solution does not stop being universal healthcare. And that's really kind of what drives a lot of this. The reality is that Vicente, either he does not know it or he doesn't care, because he doesn't really want to pass something like, he has never espoused it. So he sort of works from the conclusion of, what can I say in order to create all these constraints and all these blockages from us to be able to achieve these things that we know are going to actually help people and address their fundamental needs. And that's why he gets away with saying all these kinds of stuff about how people culturally feel or what people culturally want. In reality, I don't even think he has a real way of knowing what they want, because he hasn't done any town halls. He hasn't actually spoken to the community.
Let's zero in a little bit on this most recent thing with ICE, these most recent 2 votes from these 2 congressmen. And also, I would say, an outside perception of the Valley that has developed is this idea that during the Biden years, Democrats in general kind of turned a blind eye to the actual real problems that were developing on the border down there.
Right.
And undoubtedly, I think that to be the truth. But it seems as though these votes by these 2 congressmen could easily be justified by the idea that the rest of Texas doesn't understand what has gone down at the border. Talk about what you see as, perhaps the lasting influence of that border crisis during the Biden years, as they translate, of course, into, Donald Trump did very, very well in 2024, which I think is probably a direct result of that. Talk about how that tendency has developed up to this point as we move into the midterm.
Yeah, I mean, I think like what we've been doing over the past few years, especially since the entrance of Donald Trump into the political fray, is appeasing that kind of rhetoric of like anti-immigrant rhetoric, even if it's like couched in this idea of border security. And every single election, I don't know if you've noticed, every single election, the border gets fetishized as this thing where it's like, sacred, and it must be militarized, and people have to, like, it's just kind of, people are just pouring over, and it's just like a war zone. And I think what I've tried to do, especially like at this moment in time, is to give the border a true human face. Like, people live here, families work across the border, come back, people have businesses, family ties, relationships. It's a very complex social fabric that takes place here. It's not just like there's a line and then in between there's nothing and then the US starts and Mexico starts. No,
right.
We're very much interlinked, and we always have been historically. So what has been done, I think, by Democrats, they're a lot to blame as well in this regard. They've been, because I guess like the immigrant population can't defend itself as much and can't vote as much, they've been able to use it as also this kind of wedge, again, as a cultural issue. Republicans have used it, drilled over and over, and Democrats have just been, absent from that battle. They've sort of just been following them to the right on this issue. And that is really what has led us to allow something like ICE from occurring. That is something that has allowed us to fund, for example, Border Patrol to the tune also of billions, and DHS to become bloated, and the border to be militarized in this kind of way without providing any actual solutions. They don't really talk about actually what sustains immigration. Is a problem of it's a social problem. It's not a problem of enforcement. It's something that you could deal with at the root issue. It's something that you could deal with through collaboration and establishing much more of a link between the 2 countries that is collaborative, rather than dictating those terms and then using military to enforce all of these things. The reality is, those who have been fed by this kind of narrative are politicians like Donald Trump, and then everybody who continues following that narrative, and the industrial military complex, and as well as all the other militarization complex around the border, because those budgets do not ever stop growing, even as the problem does not get fixed.
Right.
So I cross back and forth on the border, have been doing it for years and years. I think I would take a bet that I've crossed the border more than probably anybody in Brownsville, because my life has been sort of like this for most of my time. I've crossed back and forth. I see what that dynamic looks like. And I've done it since I was a child. There is no such thing as an open border. If anything, since 9/11, the border has become much, much more hermetic, much more difficult and militarized to even like interact with, even if you have a right to do it. So it's been kind of a pain for people down here to have to deal with that broken relationship that has only been addressing the needs of politicians to cater to their audience who say, we have open borders, and they keep on creating this impression of, doom and gloom down here on the border. None of them actually live here. Most of them never even come here, but it's just an easy piñata for them to hit every election cycle. So I think we need to reframe this issue from this thing of like, the only solution to this is militarization rather than collaboration, and also addressing the social needs that create these patterns of migrations that afterwards can become somewhat problematic, but that certainly for the richest country in the world are not unsolvable, are not unfixable. We have all the resources to do it, and to do it sustainably, and to do it humanely.
Very good. So let's talk electability here. You're, of course, challenging a congressman who, as we've talked about more often than not, tends to vote to the right from his political left. So what would you say to a person who's worried that a more progressive candidate like yourself than the incumbent is going to have a hard time against a Republican in November, given the realities of the voting base in the district?
Well, for one, I would say if you intend to run as a Republican with Republican policies in order to beat Republicans, then what good are you elected? And we're seeing that now with somebody like Vicente Gonzalez. That's the first one. Second, if you compare the two of us, I am not the person in this race. I am not the candidate in this race who has lost consistently over and over the trust of Democratic coalitions that have supported him. Vicente Gonzalez, if he ends up being the candidate, it's going to be incredibly difficult for him to rebuild anything that he has already lost. All the political capital he has built with all these people who now feel betrayed, it will be very, very difficult for them to vote for you, let alone knock on doors and actually get out on the ground and sell this notion of what could be. Vicente, all that he's offering is, this is the way that it is, and let's just hope for the best and try to keep our heads down. That clearly has not worked. When it comes to me as a candidate, the real reason beyond just an opposition to Vicente that I am doing this is because I believe democracy has not actually been at work here, not with one party or the other, but especially, with the Democratic Party being the party that was supposed to be the party of the working class. There is at least an avenue for a working class and also just a defender of middle class interests candidate, and that person is not Vicente. So one of the reasons why Bernie Sanders actually won in the Democratic Party primary in 2020 along the border was because he spoke to people directly and he talked about the issues. He didn't just leave it at the labels, which is something that my opponent is very much ready to do, just basically claim a victory on like something that does not sound as scary. He actually addressed the policy. He went to the fundamentals of what people are feeling and what it is that we need to do in order to address those issues. So right now, it's not even just a problem of this election. It's a problem of what are the solutions that we need to implement. Even if somebody like Vicente Gonzalez wins, we know that he is captured by the same party politics and corporate donors that have led us to where we are. And that place where we are is not sustainable and is going to actually create much, much more desperation and devastation among our people. And we're already seeing it happen. So what we need to do is not just win an election, but work to implement the programs that will solve these fundamental issues and will make somebody like Donald Trump just a thing of the past, a candidate who is unviable because people no longer see him as anything that could deliver for them the results that we can actually do. So my platform is not just about opposing ICE, not just about opposing the creeping influence of somebody like Elon Musk. It's also about addressing the issues that people have fundamentally, which are right now we're living in one of the most uninsured regions in the country. So we need universal healthcare. We need those benefits to actually go to people rather than to insurance companies. To address affordable housing, people are getting priced out of the market. We need to do it from a social perspective, to build community land trusts, all these different kinds of avenues where people have assured affordable housing, and that families who have lived here for generations are not priced out because these rich corporations come in or private equity comes in and starts buying up their neighborhoods. 3, we can afford universal childcare. New Mexico already has that. New York has just implemented it with Mamdani. These are things that are within our reach, where we don't have a problem of a lack of resources or a lack of solutions. We have a problem of a lack of political integrity and political courage. And in this case, what I am saying is we can build these things. We can believe that we can build these things if we are not being price gouged by the corporations that have taken over our political system, or that we're not being disallowed by a political class who is doing all the excuse making for why these things are not possible. So what I am offering people is this platform that says we can do these things, but we can only do it through candidacies and through organizations that are not beholden to private actors. And my campaign takes no money from corporate PACs. My campaign is based on volunteer energy alone. And what I have built through very, very little financial support is basically a reflection of how people feel that about the political moment and why they believe that something like this is not only possible, but is actually necessary to move forward.
Very, very good. Dr. Etienne Rosas is running against Democratic incumbent Congressman Vicente Gonzales in District 34 in South Texas. This has been a great conversation. We appreciate you joining. Tell us where we can find out more about you and your campaign online and stuff.
Right. Thank you, Chris. And thanks, everybody, for joining and listening. You can find more information about the campaign on the webpage rosasforcongress.com. That's ROSAS for FOR, Congress.com. And then you can also visit us on the Facebook or Instagram, where we have regular updates on what we've been up to. The handle for my personal handle, which is one I use for the campaign, is Etienne Rev altogether. That's ETIENNEREV. And you can also donate, volunteer to with the campaign, get involved in some other way. A lot of what we're doing is built on community mobilization, which would span beyond this election, is based on working class power, alliances with unions, community-based organizations. So we want as many people to be involved in it as possible, and we want this to be a sustainable movement beyond this election.
Very, very good. We appreciate the time very much, and good luck, and be safe on the campaign trail. We appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Chris, and thanks for the invitation. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. Progress Texas is an independent, nonprofit, rapid response media organization. While campaigns come and go, we're the permanent home for progressive media in action in the Lone Star State. Learn all about us and how you can support us at progresstexas.org. I'm Chris Mosier for Etienne Rosas. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you again next time.